Good afternoon, Silurians and guests. I'm Michael Searle, president of the Silurians Press Club. The club, formerly the Society of Silurians, has been around since 1924. Its 300 members are veteran journalists, some of us as mature as the men we are honoring today. Today, we have the pleasure of honoring two titans of 20th century journalism, Bernard and Marvin Kalb, with our Lifetime Achievement Award. They join a long list of Lifetime Achievement Award winners going back to 1969. CBS, where both Kalbs worked, is prominent on that list. In fact, the first Lifetime Achievement Award went to CBS's Walter Cronkite, and the last, in 2019, to Steve Kroft of CBS's 60 Minutes. Mike Wallace, Don Hewitt, and Charles Osgood are also on the list. None of them did more to elevate the prestige of CBS News or of broadcast journalism generally than the Kalb brothers. The two men have had separate careers, though they got together occasionally on talk shows and co-wrote an excellent book on Henry Kissinger. Bernard has been pursuing news stories since 1946, when he signed on with the New York Times, where he worked as a reporter for 16 years, including the first stint in Southeast Asia. He then went on to CBS and later NBC, reporting first from Asia, including Vietnam, and then the State Department, where he was the chief diplomatic correspondent. Marvin, who is 8 years younger, spent most of his career in broadcast, also at CBS and then NBC. At CBS, he was one of the group known as the Murrow Boys. For you younger folks, that was Edward R. Murrow, another CBS celebrity journalist. Marvin spent more than a decade as director of the Shorenstein Center of Media in Cambridge. That made him a Harvard professor, something most of us ink-stained wretches can only dream of. At the age of 90, he still anchors the Kalb Report on PBS with National Press Club President Mike Friedman. That covers two illustrious careers very briefly and doesn't do justice to the influence these two men have had in their long careers. When I discussed the Kalbs with writer and Silurians Vice President David Margolick, he offered a remembrance of the Kalbs from a slightly different perspective, which I've asked him to share. David?
To me, as someone who watched them growing up, Bernard and Marvin Kalb are reminders that the words familiar and family have a common root. The Kalbs were constant, elevating, enlightening presences in my small town New England home, coming into our kitchens at 6:30 every night from WHDH in Boston or WPRO in Providence. Where I sat, they were voices of civilization and sophistication. They looked and sounded like brothers, and as Jewish brothers, we took pride in them. But the resemblance didn't stop there. They both covered serious things. They both were authoritative. And though the worlds they described were weighty and complicated, they both spoke clearly and plainly. Neither was ever frivolous or overly ingratiating, but there was nothing pompous or off-putting about either of them ever. Their distinctiveness was apparent not just in how they sounded, but even in the way they identified themselves. To quote a line of CBS origin that was also around our house, I can hear it now. Marvin Kalb, CBS News, the State Department. It always had the same cadence, businesslike and brisk, supplying the necessary information and punctuation, but without strutting, preening, or lingering. Confident and dignified, but always modest. To me and my family, the Kalbs represented another, more extended family, the family of CBS News. That was the family of Walter Cronkite, of course, Charles Collingwood, Daniel Shore, Dan Rather, Roger Mudd, Charles Kuralt, Haywood Hale Broun, and all the rest. David Andelman, too. In my house, we loved it, trusted it, were loyal to it. Hearing the first few bars of Simple Gifts from Appalachian Spring the other day, what popped into my head wasn't Aaron Copland, but CBS reports, and I got goosebumps. Apart from their own not so simple gifts, the Kalbs embody that proud and stately tradition. To me, they are great figures, the kind who could inspire a young boy or girl to become a journalist. And once he or she got there, always to try to do it right. Michael, back to you.
The Kalbs were correspondents at a time when the press was seen as a source of dependable, balanced information and analysis, even wisdom. Think of Uncle Walter Cronkite. There wasn't your news and my news, and newsmen like the Kalbs did their best to reinforce the perceived integrity of the profession. No one doubted the veracity of Bernard Kalb's reporting from Vietnam. When he resigned as head of public affairs for the State Department in 1984, after accusing the Reagan administration of spreading disinformation about Libya, he issued a statement. Faith in the word of America is the pulse beat of our democracy, he said. Anything that hurts America's credibility hurts America. Unfortunately, today the public is flooded with disinformation from the current government and its supporters in the media. Distrust of what we write and broadcast has never been higher. We're going to let the Kalbs themselves speak. But first, I'm going to read to you the inscription that will be on the plaque that we made for them. To Marvin Kalb, in recognition of a lifetime of excellence as a journalist at CBS and NBC, as an author, television host, lecturer, and founding director of the Shorenstein Center, the Silurians Press Club hereby grants Marvin Kalb its Lifetime Achievement Award. To Bernie, in recognition of a lifetime of excellence as a journalist at the New York Times, CBS, and NBC, and as a media critic, author, lecturer, and holder of journalistic principle, the Silurians Press Club hereby presents its Lifetime Achievement Award to Bernard Kalb. Marvin, you and Bernie were going to have a conversation.
I just want to say how deeply grateful we are for this Lifetime Achievement Award. I suspect that if my father was here, he would probably say, you know, Michael, Bernie is 98 years of age and Marvin is 90. It's about time you gave them a Lifetime Achievement.
I'm sure.
He had a good sense of humor. And I was thinking the other day about the amount of time that the two of us have spent in this business of journalism. Bernie has been at it for 78 years of his life. He's been in the business of journalism. And I've been in the business of journalism now for 72 years of my life. And I think that adds up to 150 years of this generation of Kalb contribution to journalism. Has it made any difference? If it has, it's probably in a very minor way. But so many of the comments that have been made today are so deeply appreciated. It's the closest thing I think I'm going to get to a memorial service that I can appreciate. It was quite extraordinary. I was just wondering, Bernardo, I called you Bernardo, I called you Liba Brita much more often. But Liba Brita, let me ask you, it's been mentioned before, but you sort of got involved in the business of journalism way back in World War II, when you were in the Army and you were sent to the Aleutian Islands. Remember that moment?
Marvin, I want to join you and echo exactly what you said, and our thanks to the Silurians for creating this event. I had no idea we had so many press agents on our payroll. They did a marvelous job of portraying us to the extreme, I must say. And when you mentioned my earliest days of journalism, that was well before I could read and write, taken in by the drama of the world. How could you resist it? You're pummeled by the world, and so you had to try to decipher the world. Oh, my. I go back to, you mentioned my age. I'm much older. I just passed at that particular number you gave. In fact, it is an even greater number. In a few minutes, I may be entering a new century for all I know. But I am deeply moved and on the verge of powerful nostalgia by all these comments and vignettes and anecdotes that have been shared with us today. But one of the great things, of course, that I cherish most of all is you. I mean, when I think of me without you, I think very little. I think of our rich inseparability. It has been the great, aside from Phyllis as my wife and my children and so forth, my greatest inseparability, of course, is with you. We share the same vocabulary, the same enthusiasms, the same excitement about the world. Imagine you growing up living in New York City in a tenement in a 3 or 4 room apartment with my sister and my brother, you, and our parents once upon a time. Let me go back to the 30s. And you're locked into that enclosed world, and you know the world is out there, huge and vast and thundering and compassionate and strong. So you embrace it. Embrace it despite the powerful ignorance you have about what indeed is going on in the world. So you reach out with both hands, and what do you become? Inevitably, a searcher, an inquisitor, a journalist. You want to know more. You want to know more. You want to share more. And it's your way of embracing and deciphering the world. How could you do anything else, as a matter of fact? Of course, you do. You interrupt your entanglement with the world to write these books. I don't know where you got the discipline. The only thing I keep saying is our family distributed discipline unfairly. They gave it all to you and let me go wandering. But be that as it may, we've all had great dividends from your discipline. The idea of so many people getting together and recollecting and reminiscing is quite extraordinary. But the idea is to go out each day and look at the world as a new sphere hurtling through space, filled with uncertainties, drama, tensions, fears, even wars at some times. But still, planet number 3 has been a triumph. And may it long keep whirling around the sun.
I hope so. I'm with you all the way on that. You just mentioned wars, and I could take you back to your work on the Dacian
Oh my.
World War II with Dashiell Hammett. That was an exciting guy to be with. You then went on to cover Indonesia with another exciting story with Sukarno. But you have always said that the story that has stayed with you the most is the Vietnam experience, the war in Vietnam, the people you met there. And I want to ask you, since Vietnam touched so many of us of a certain age, what is it about that story? What is it about that war that keeps you going?
Marvin, I first went to Vietnam in a different century. I went to Vietnam for the first time in 1956, and I went back repeatedly. I would sometimes spend 2, 3, 4 months, go back to Hong Kong for a week or two, go back to Vietnam for 2 or 3 months, etc. But I would say for about a decade or so, Vietnam and I became entangled very powerfully. You could not resist that outcome. Vietnam, 500,000 Americans, 100,000 killed, 2, 3 times that wounded, and then thrown away, discarded, as it were, beaten, the United States beaten by a powerful nationalist communist movement. Extraordinary at that time, a great blunder which we never should have got involved, and it would have evolved on its own in a dangerous world. You know, you mentioned the Adachian, Marvin. That was when I was in the Army. And I graduated City College where the tuition rates were very low. I then joined the Army. I was in the Army in 1942 or 43. I think it was 43, and I was sent to the Aleutian Islands, that band of islands that link the Pacific, that go across the top of the Pacific from China all the way to Alaska. And I was trained both as an infantryman, and I had a scrapping of journalistic experience at college. And since the island we were on, Adak, had already had its little war, although Attu and Kiska had had big wars out there on the extreme end of the Antarctic chain. I became one of the writers with a rifle in one arm and a typewriter in the other on the island of Adak. And they asked us to create a little newspaper, which we did, a mimeograph newspaper of 2 pages on both sides that gave us 4 pages. And the editor-in-chief was no less the grand mystery writer, Dashiell Hammett. He was 1,000,000 years old. Actually, he was 50. And he was our editor, and he created our little 4-page newspaper. And the idea of a bunch of illiterate kids like myself being in the same room working with Dashiell Hammett is, even all these years later, unimaginable. After my 2-3 years in the Army, a couple of years, as I say, in the Aleutian Islands, I came back, and in the Aleutians, I made a habit of listening to the world news, the CBS World News roundup at 8 a.m. And in the 2 years I was in the Aleutians, I would listen to it every morning. It came on at 8 o'clock and introduced me to the world for that particular day. The moderator, the anchor of that particular program, was a journalist called Alan Jackson. And I would listen to Alan Jackson, month after month after month. And one day I listened and I found a different voice in Alan Jackson. Well, I couldn't resist. I sat down and wrote a letter to CBS News with one question: does Alan Jackson have a cold? I never got an answer, but I was discharged from the Army before I could have. And when I got to New York, which was fairly quickly after my discharge, the war was over, it was 1946, I went up to CBS News to meet Alan Jackson. Well, one thing led to another, and the next thing you know, I was applying for a job at the New York Times owned station WQXR, which is still on the air, thank you. And after working there for a while, I began writing, volunteering, submitting articles to the New York Times, some of which they accepted, some of which they were amused by, et cetera. And the next thing I know, I had a job working at the New York Times. I was a correspondent there for about 15 years, 20 years, I forget. I was at CBS about 10 or 15 years. I had a little sprinkling of NBC in my career, a little bit of CNN, but it's been a torrential parade of news organizations and involvement with the world. You might say the globe and I have been going steady for a long time.
Yeah, but there's one marvelous part of your life that you're skipping over, and I have to remind you of it. In 1986.
1986. What happened?
1986. You were for 2 years the spokesman at the State Department, the Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs, and a story ran in the Washington Post by Bob Woodward about a program of disinformation specifically carried out by the White House, by the National Security Advisor. You read that story. It was published on a Thursday, I remember. You and I got on a plane from New York. You were covering Secretary of State Schultz at the United Nations. The two of us flew to Washington on Friday to attend Yom Kippur services. I didn't ask you your response to the disinformation, and you clearly didn't want to give it to me. We were at an event on Sunday. I could see that you were in agony, but I sort of didn't want to press you. I assumed that if you had something to say, you'd say it to me. And on Monday, you went on up to New York and you talked to your two best friends, Abe Rosenthal and Artie Gelb, both at the Times. And I don't know what they said or what you said at that time, but you came back and wrote the most extraordinary letter of resignation, which Michael read a portion of at the very beginning in introducing this program. That was an amazing action on your part. You sensed, you were told of disinformation, you were a spokesman, and you said, no, I want no part of disinformation. And you quit. That was pretty gutsy. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah, how could I not remember that? It was in the Washington Post. I may not have the years in my attic in my memory, all sorts of things are stored there, but I can't instantly recall them. I think it was 1986. Does that sound right?
86.
86. When I read in the Washington Post about a disinformation campaign aimed at Gaddafi of Libya, the first thought that came to mind is the integrity of the United States. Disinformation with its bundle of inaccuracies, of accusations, and so forth. I did not think the United States should be involved to damage its integrity by using disinformation, which it wrote about in the article. The article, I think, was by one of the security people in the administration. And I didn't like the idea of being identified with disinformation, both unbearable, both for the United States and in a very minor way, my own credibility, but big for me. And I went in and told the secretary, thank you very much, but thank you for the honor of being named an assistant secretary of state, but I protest disinformation by the United States and still do.
Exactly. And that is, to me, sort of one of the two high points of your professional.
I didn't know I had a second.
Yes, you do. The second is that large word, integrity.
Oh, but let me, no, but I don't want to write, Marvin, I don't want to write.
Wait a minute now. The kind of stuff that is often spoken of on television today, written about in newspapers today, you as a journalist would never have written it the same way, because you always felt you had to be super careful about fact. You were not there to put your own opinions in. You were there to tell people what you knew. And that was pretty much the same thing that Ed Murrow told a group of us at CBS at one point when he almost unwittingly, he didn't mean to stop to get into a lecture, but it was in the newsroom, the radio newsroom, the 17th floor at 485 Madison Avenue in New York. And Murrow walked in and somebody asked him a question and another person jumped in and gave his opinion about the issue. And Murrow rather coldly and dismissively said, I don't expect opinion from you. I expect fact. Tell me what you know, not what you think. And I've never forgotten that bit of advice. It stuck in my mind, and you weren't in the newsroom at that time, but you have lived a life that is in effect that same way. You don't tell people what you think often. You tell people what you know, and that is an amazing thing. And throughout all of my life as a journalist, you have always been the model for integrity, decency, honesty. You've been my mentor all the way. And I can tell and share a story with family and friends here. When I was in college, I was given a summertime job by your mother-in-law, one of the most remarkable women I've ever met, Susie Bernstein. And I was to be the editor of the Lido Beach Register. It was a 4-page weekly newspaper at the Lido Beach Country Club. And page 3 of the Lido Beach Register was always filled with photographs of the people who were there. And a man came over to me one Friday night. He shook hands with me and slipped what turned out to be a $50 bill in my hand and said, "I hope that you will put a picture of my daughter on page 3 next week." I don't know what I said to the guy, but I know what I did. I ran away from him, called you. You were in the office at the Times. I described to you exactly what had happened to me. I didn't know what to do. And you cut to the chase. You said, "Return the 50."
You sure I didn't say that? 100?
Return the $50 bill if she earns her way onto page 3. She was a tennis player. If she was really good, you'd put her in. Otherwise, no.
Yeah.
The net effect of that was that when that husband, on Sunday, when they would give tips to waiters, I was a waiter then, he stiffed me because I gave him his $50 back. And that was my first lesson in Bernard Kalb Ethics of Journalism. You don't take any gifts, you just give them the facts.
Marvin, how did you get, while we're reminiscing about past and the present, how did you get caught up in the Soviet story, the Russian story?
I got caught up in the Soviet story because of a guy named Bernard Kalb telling me in college that I told him I wanted to major in English. And he looked at me, you, very tolerantly, and you said, "Well, given where we are, given the need to get a job, given the importance of not wasting this college education at City College, you're always interested in history, you're interested in journalism. Why don't you find a story that is on everybody's mind now?" We were just starting the Cold War. There was the US, there was Russia. And you said, "Why don't you study the Russian language so you can talk to these people?" So I started studying the language. There was a marvelous history professor at City College named Hans Kohn, who awakened in me an interest in East European, and particularly Russian literature. That went to Russian history. And when I was finished with college, you pointed me to the Russian Research Center at Harvard. You even nicely provided a good bit of the cash that I needed to get there. And I was studying Russian history and all, and very intent on teaching Russian history and becoming a professor of Russian history, when Ed Murrow offered me an opportunity in May of 1957 to join CBS. It took me about 3 seconds to consider his offer. I said, "Yes, sir." And he encouraged people very much within the world of CBS to appreciate the fact that if we send somebody to Moscow, let the guy at least know the language, something about the country. If we're in a Cold War, let us at least have the best possible information we can get. Murrow pushed me. I did end up in May of 1960 getting to Moscow. and working there then for 3 years. Then I was made diplomatic correspondent, sent to Washington. And then for the next 17 years, sort of traveled all over the world.
Yeah.
And those were the times that you and I would sort of find ourselves at 36,000 feet, you flying to Asia, me flying to the Middle East or Russia. And we did, in that sense, cover the world. And it was a fantastic experience. I am deeply grateful to you, to people in the industry, and to, let's face it, all of the wonderful people who showed up today at this Silurians Press Club event. I am deeply grateful, and I don't think this is an afternoon that I'm likely to forget for a very, very long time indeed.
Not easy. It's a great story, Marvin, that whole chase through the years of where it began and where it still is now, and then you're still so busy. I keep thinking of the lack of ease to get news when you really have to get news. I'm thinking, for example, in 1972, I think it was, I went to China with, who was it at that time? Schultz, Secretary Schultz, I think it was. And I poking around there on my own with other reporters, and I was interested in one particular story about the nature of Soviet-Chinese relations, because they were always pretty tense. And so I asked one of my Chinese escorts, we were in some sort of a hotel lobby with all sorts of fruits around and so forth. And I asked him a direct question that would help me in my understanding of the Sino-Soviet split. I said, whatever his name was, could you help me on that? And his inclination immediately was to say to me, have a tangerine. And I went over to this bowl of fruits and took a tangerine. But getting at the bottom of a news story sometimes means you've got to skip the tangerine. You've got to sidestep the tangerine. And journalism is that constant challenge of trying to find a piece of the truth in what you're writing about. It doesn't satisfy a personal need. It satisfies a lust in yourself to know what is going on and to explain it and to share it, to decipher the world so we know what this planet is all about and how we can keep it whirling.
I got to ask you a question as we wrap up, and that has to do with the nature of journalism today as you and I perceive it in a comparison to the way journalism was when we first got started in the 40s, 50s. The issue that comes up in my mind very, very often, and it goes back to that Murrow alert, which don't tell me what you think, tell me what you know. I find today that 2 points I would like to make quickly. One, without the mainstream press, by which I mean the Times, the Post, the Wall Street Journal, the network news, NewsHour, NPR, without that press, in the last 4 years, they saved us. They saved American democracy. And I feel that very strongly. The other issue is that the press itself has split apart, and there are now two presses. There's the mainstream press, and then there is the Fox-led brigade that will not be interested so much in covering the news as presenting straight out propaganda. I lived in Russia for a long time. I can recognize propaganda, and they do an awful lot of that. Whatever the number one leader says, in those days it was Khrushchev, Stalin, whatever, and for the last 4 years it was pretty much Trump. They reported what he said without any depth, whatever. They just said it. But what I sense, and this is the part of it that is disturbing, there is a tendency on the part of sometimes very good reporters to begin to slip their own opinions into the coverage of the news. where you expect the news, you are also getting an element of commentary. It's not commentary totally, but an element of it. And it leaves me feeling a little uneasy. I would prefer it if we're just, tell me the facts, please. What do you think, Bernie?
I agree with you up to a point, but we'd have to define the word commentary. Sometimes commentary is reality. You need context sometimes to appreciate what someone is saying. And when you take a look at the present time, the way the president has attacked the press on a regular basis with a view toward destroying its integrity, its veracity, so that the American people do not believe the president is the man he is. And I'm looking at a piece of analysis here from Brookings that picks up what the president thinks of the press. The fake news media is not my enemy, it is the enemy of the American people. That's the president trying to destroy any integrity the press has, any veracity it exhibits, etc. And he has some degree succeeded in making the press the fall guy for some of the things that he says or does. It's a tough time. It's a very difficult moment in American history, this particular moment. And it makes me sometimes feel as though I suspended, that I'm living in both reality and unreality, that I'm in pursuit of something ultimate and it keeps slipping away here. The fact is, the United States, there is something essentially at the heart of the United States that deserves a constant applause, a constant merit, tries to inject a little bit of sanity into the world. And other countries as well do that, but not all. And so the role of the media is so critical toward the advancement of stability. And yet it keeps getting hammered away by the president on a regular basis that things are rigged and fake news, et cetera, et cetera. It gets to be fairly boring.
It's all boring, but very, very important. And once again,
boring but fatal.
Yeah, well, yeah, it could be. But I just want once again to thank Michael, the Silurians Press Club, for their wonderful Lifetime Achievement Award, for all of the people who spoke about us. Deeply, deeply grateful to you all. Thank you very much. God bless you all. And now, Michael, as we say, back to you.
Before you get out, Marvin, may I share in echoing your sentiment exactly and thanking everyone for their participation and generosity in this program.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, we all love you. You know, some of us because we're related to you, you know, but the rest of us because we've admired your journalism forever and continue to admire it. So thank you very much. Your award is well deserved, and keep on keeping on.
Thank you.
Michael, very much.
All right.
Ciao. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Well done. Well done, everybody. Thank you all.